Welcome to another episode of Practicing with Purpose. I'm your host, Cindy Watson, and today we're talking with Josh Richner about negotiation and helping debt-ridden clients, and we've all had some of those. So for those of you who don't know Josh, you're in for a treat. He's been helping people out of debt and improve their credit since 2008. I can think of times when I could have used that. He founded a debt relief company in 2012 and began working with the consumer rights law firm, National Legal Center, in 2016. And now he collaborates with attorneys and law firms around the country with the aim of solving their clients' debt-related difficulties. So tell us, Rich, I'd love to hear a little bit about you and what made you want to pursue this unusual career path.
Sure. Thank you for having me. You know, the career path, it's one of those I didn't choose it, it chose me type of situations. I had a friend that took me under his wing. He was helping people get out of debt and needed some help with his job. So he brought me aboard and taught me what he knew, and I wound up managing that company with him, and it really just happened.
Yeah, I bet you have a lot of people in your personal life. I'm just thinking as we're chatting here as well, I have to get you hooked up with my two boys. They're in their early 20s and both of them are well on their way to accruing debt and no idea about how to get out of it. So
yeah, we really have no idea what we're getting into when we become young adults, and especially on college campus, it's easy to get into debt at an early age through no intention, through no we're not always equipped with the skills and information needed to make good decisions at that time. So it happens early.
Yeah, and I love that you raised that sort of white elephant in the room, Josh, because I think our education system really doesn't teach those practical financial skills. And I mean, it's probably one of the most important life lessons. And while we're talking about the white elephant in the room, I mean, obviously we're framing this as advice to help you with your debt-ridden clients. But let's face it, as lawyers, a lot of us come out of law school with student loans and debts coming out the yin-yang, and it can be very easy as we're starting up practices and getting into that to rack up a heck of a lot of debt. Before we know it, it can get unmanageable. So feel free to listen with both ears here today, both for your client's perspective and also if any of this resonates for you personally. So I know, Josh, that you made this sort of interesting jump, if you will, or maybe it's not a jump, but from that debt and credit services to serving a consumer rights law firm. So tell us a little bit about that. What prompted that change?
Sure. So with my debt relief company, really what I found was that as time went on, so I got started in this space around 2008. And as time went on, the creditors, collectors, debt buyers, they got smarter and they started using more legal methods to collect on their debts than they had been doing previously. So I found myself a bit ill-equipped to best serve my clients. I'm a non-attorney. I could negotiate with the attorneys that were pursuing the collections, but I couldn't give my clients legal advice. I wasn't equipped to give them legal advice. And so through that, I was connected with with National Legal Center, who I work with now, and learned that they were much better able to provide the services to a client that they really needed. It was a little bit humbling because I had to recognize that, okay, my business just isn't cutting it. You guys can do it better. And, just having a lot more tools in the tool belt when they can, actually provide the client with legal advice. The attorneys can look at the legal risks, the legal protections, and employ those in the strategies that are being used for the client. It was just empowering. And so that's really what led me to realize that I can do so much more for the people that I'm working with these tools available through the law firm, through the attorneys, and it was really very helpful.
Okay, sounds great. And boy, I tell you, as soon as you said 2008, the alarm bells went off because I hadn't really made that connection before. Talk about a challenging time to be jumping into this. My goodness.
Sure.
So why don't we jump in about what situation, a client would come to a law firm, for example, with debt-related issues, and how would you, sort of advise we begin to help them?
Sure. So it's highly circumstantial, as is always the case. When what we tend to see the most is clients who are looking for bankruptcy, but cannot qualify for any number of reasons. Or maybe they can only qualify for a Chapter 13 and their circumstances prohibit that from being ideal. So that's when alternative approaches come into play, other legal strategies that can be employed. So that's really a significant portion. Maybe somebody had filed for bankruptcy too recently in the past, and so they can't do it again, or whatever, whatever the circumstances may be, the attorneys will look at it and they might make a recommendation that bankruptcy is not for them for any number of reasons. And so that's when we can look at those alternate options.
Okay. And tell me, like, how does this service add value to a law firm?
Well, that's a good question. So for the law firm which law firm are you referring to? For National Legal Center itself, or for the law firms that, maybe refer individuals along to us?
Yeah, like for our listeners out there, how can this be something that, they can take advantage of?
Yeah, so it's really about helping individuals find the right solution for that. A big part of my career focus has been relationship building, just getting to know who you are, what kind of clients you are speaking with, and what kind of challenges they're facing. And just making those connections, helping people find, okay, you speak with individuals who don't qualify for bankruptcy and you want to be able to help them, but you just don't have the solution in-house. So in situations like that, when you can find a reliable and reputable attorney that can help with those situations, it's all about helping the consumer first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what tips do you have for us? Like, can you give us any sort of concrete tips? So for our listeners out there, either some advice that for them in terms of, sort of staying out of debt, or if they get into debt, but also for them to bring to their clients, what kind of tips can they be offering?
The biggest thing that immediately comes to mind is just the emotional impact of the situation on the individual they're speaking with. Empathy goes an incredibly long way when it comes to helping people overcome financial challenges. It's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for the individual to reach out for help in the first place. There's a huge barrier there. There's a huge wall. And so when they, very often they're nervous, they're uncomfortable, they're afraid, they don't know what they don't know. Yeah. They don't know the help they're going to get. And so just being cognizant of that and looking at everything beyond that part, looking at everything holistically and looking at the big picture with them, making sure to take into account all the many factors that come into play with a financial circumstance, because you might see that one solution is just perfect for them, and then you learn about that one thing that just derails that whole concept, and you have to take a different approach altogether.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that I would suggest.
Okay. And what are some of the options, Josh? Like, we're sort of skirting around the edges of it, but for people listening, I know obviously it depends on the individual circumstances, but just in terms of broad brush strokes, what are some of the options that people are looking at when they find themselves in that difficult situation?
Sure. I have a general path that I like to see a consumer go down before they go to, kind of the end all of bankruptcy. And so generally what I encourage individuals to do is to start off with just an in-house review, look at their budget, look at their finances, gather all the information that they can, and see if it's something that they can solve themselves. Is this solvable just with my own resources? And sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. Then they can look at things like balance transfers and debt management plans, which are facilitated through nonprofit credit counseling agencies. These are the less damaging approaches that a consumer can take. They don't have as significant of an impact on their credit. If debt management or these other options aren't affordable or aren't an option for whatever reason, then they can look at debt settlement or debt negotiation with the assistance of a law firm. Definitely, there's for-profit debt settlement companies out there, but as I said, they just don't have the ability to help with the big picture. And creditors and debt buyers have gotten a lot more aggressive. So it's helpful to have a law firm involved. And then we'll look at the consumer protections as far as FDCPA violations, FCRA violations, make sure their rights are being protected and things of that sort. And we look at income protection. If our services are unaffordable or not appropriate for whatever reason, then we look to bankruptcy attorneys to help. So it's that general path. Those are the primary solutions that I look at with a consumer.
Okay. And how do you define success, Josh, right? Like I'd be interested in that in terms of this, like when we're talking about outcomes, how do you define success for us?
So we're referring to for the consumer, success for the
Well,
consumer?
both actually. I'd be interested, sort of across the board. Yeah.
Well, success for the consumer is a moving target because it will change depending on what occurs with the consumer's debt as time goes on. So we ultimately want to help them resolve their debts. That's the ultimate goal. Now, sometimes that may look different. It may be a settlement. It may be a balance in full. It may be that the creditor cannot pursue it any longer. It's a conversation. Success is really going to be determined by a relationship that you have with your consumer, with your client, and being able to identify that, okay, we have helped them reach their goals, even if their goals have changed. And a lot of that comes through education, educating them on their rights, their risks, what can and can't happen. And there comes a time where sometimes, even if there's balances remaining, where the client says, I'm happy. I've reached the goals that I need. My credit's where it is, or whatever the case may be. So it's highly individualized. And I hope that answers your question on the client-facing side.
Yeah. And what about for the lawyers? Like, in what way do you think, if at all, that this, like either raising your awareness about this or having access or this information can help lawyers sort of practice a little more on purpose, if you will?
Absolutely. So again, I would think that having a broader net or a broader skill set to be able to assist clients would empower a law office, would empower an attorney to be better equipped to help the clients that are reaching out to them. Because a client can reach out for one particular legal issue, not realizing the train that comes with it, not realizing the other things that come along. So as far as just, being intentional with your practice, I think that understanding where your, kind of what your brand voice is, what your firm intends to present of itself. If you are a firm, if you are an attorney that wants to be able to be an ally to your clients, then having a general understanding of these options, because these options often also come, in divorce situations and foreclosure situations. And so there's a lot of practice areas that it touches, and having those resources and being able to empower your clients is very successful.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, Josh, it raises a great point for me, which is for those lawyers who this is like an immediate resist or pushback factor, just recognizing that there are other resources out there that you don't necessarily have. You need to have an awareness about this, be able to know that these resources available, and using a firm like yours, for example, or depending on what jurisdiction that you're in, but just being able to have resources lined up so that you can offer that full service while still staying within your practice area that you love, the thing that makes you feel most on purpose. Would you agree with that? I assume trying to dabble in this, you don't know enough about it and you don't actually like it, is probably not a great idea.
You're absolutely right. And as with almost any, practice area, stepping into it when you're not really familiar can be damaging to the consumer. So, if it's a practice area that would be of interest to an attorney, there's a lot to learn, but it is a very fulfilling practice area. So I certainly encourage that. It's an interesting time for consumers in debt, just given the state of the world and economic situations. But just understanding and having that foundational groundwork of what is out there, what can assist my clients when they're facing these tough situations.
Yeah. And what do you find are the biggest fears that are facing sort of the people that are coming looking for this assistance? And how would you suggest that we address, how do you address them, frankly? How would you suggest we address them to help move forward?
That it's not going to work or that there's a better option. So I've spoken with many, many people over the years, and that is the underlying concern. It comes down to trust in the process, trusting the process, because when you're dealing with debt, unless you're looking at that chapter 7, it's going to be a process. It's going to take time. And you invest your trust, your resources, your time into a solution that may not work for quite some time ahead. And that's very uncomfortable for good reason. It makes sense that a client would be concerned about that. And so the solution to that is education, just helping them really understand what it is you're setting out to achieve for them. But I believe that's probably one of the biggest fears that consumers face is this going to work for me? And should I do something else instead?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, marketing will often pull them in the wrong direction. And so it is tough to cut through that and help them cut through the noise and see what is real.
Yeah. Well, and as you're describing that, it sounds like a lot of it is either, that fear of the unknown, right? Fear of missing out. There's got to be something better. I'm hearing all these other options out there, but also probably, do you find fear of being judged as well? I mean, people, your reputation, your lives, your, sort of public perception. Do you find that's a big factor for people?
Absolutely. And it's a little bit less so now, a little bit, but 10 years ago, it was much more common for a client to say, is my name going to be in the paper?
Yeah.
If they sue me, if they get this judgment against me,
Yeah.
will my name go in the paper?
Yeah.
We don't hear that as much today just because of the, digital nature of our world. But it is, will they call my friends? Will they call my work? Will they call my family? These are very real. And that's the emotional side of it that I referred to earlier is that there is not always, and very often there should not be, but there's often a level of shame, a level of guilt
Absolutely.
that comes along with the debt situation. So helping them to know there's no judgment. Life shows up. Life shows up. Most of the folks that we work with, there was a divorce, there was a health situation, there was job loss, there was some sort of reason or way that life showed up. Most people don't set out to fall into a tough financial situation. So just helping them understand that. And that's the empathy and relationship that you build with them from the very first phone call.
Yeah. Well, I love that you raised empathy. I'm a big, part of my Art of Feminine Negotiation programming is all about one of the key foundational elements is empathy. And I think as lawyers, sometimes we forget we are so used to the system and the legal system and the potential conflict that comes with that. I think it's so important to remind ourselves and ground ourselves in putting yourself back in the shoes of that client that sits in front of you and really allowing yourself to have them feel seen and heard and understood and putting yourself in their shoes to the extent that you can. So
yes, these are humans. They're more than just a client. It's human beings, and connecting with them and helping, finding a way to make a connection with them goes such a long way.
Yeah, and we may deal with this every day, but for them, this is probably the first time and hopefully their last time from their perspective. Right. So recognizing
you don't want repeat clients. That's right.
And bringing that empathy, I think, allows for them for better client relationships and allows you to practice more on purpose when you bring more of that humanity back into the practice. I think that's beautiful. We're going to switch gears a bit now and talk about the art of negotiation. So I imagine part of what you had to do in sort of that being able to negotiate people getting past these debt and consider the options. So I'd love if you could tell us a little bit about your theory, if you will, about negotiation.
Absolutely. I've studied the art of negotiation. I've lived the art of negotiation. I love it. I truly enjoy opportunities to engage with people and recognize those back and forth transactions and conversations. So in my role with my own company and then with the law firm, I believe last count was, I've personally settled about $7 million of consumer debt, and I've led a team of negotiators that settled hundreds of thousands, over their time. So it's there's very distinct types of negotiation, and it's a soft skill that you learn over time. So there's a real difference between negotiating with a creditor to settle a debt for less than the full balance as compared to negotiating for a purchase of any type, or negotiating what time we hold an appointment. Negotiations are so much more common than we really realize. And when you do take the time to recognize how prevalent negotiation is in our life and you focus on it, it's a tremendous skill to learn and grow.
Yeah. Yeah, beautiful. And I love that you talk about it as an art, because I'm a big advocate that all of life is a negotiation. And much like we were saying about debt and finances aren't taught, sadly, I think negotiation may be one of the most important skills that we ever bring to bear in our life. And yet we're really not taught it, or the extent that we're taught that negotiation is all about sort of toughness. And in my experience, again, I mean, I've been teaching about the art of negotiation. I've been, as a lawyer for over 30 years, done high stakes negotiations. And the one thing you come to know is the opposite is true. Negotiation isn't all about the toughness. It's about, as you said, being able to bring that empathy and those so-called soft skills, feminine traits, if you will, to the table. So I'd love to hear, what do you think are the most important skills or traits to bring to the table to be an effective negotiator?
I believe that listening more than speaking is one of the top things. I need to hear not just what you're telling me, but what you're inferring to me. That's a big thing, just trying to read between the lines a little bit and making that connection. But ultimately, the goal, having the right goal, each individual in the party is going to have their own goal coming to the table, coming to the conversation, whatever the case may be. And doing your best to recognize that it needs to be a moving target. A successful negotiation is not one where I get my way. It's one where we both get our way, where we both walk away happy or satisfied. So that's the biggest thing. Just when I can take the time to listen to what the other individual is saying and really try to understand, really try to unpack it as it pertains to all the things that we've learned leading up to the actual negotiation. Those are the real traits that I think lead to successful negotiations.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you talked about listening. I mean, I preach about that all of the time, because I think in North America in particular, we don't listen well in studies. I mean, it's compared to even other cultures in that we tend to talk, and we talk over each other, and or at best we wait our turn to speak, but that's very different than listening. And I often advocate what I call elevated active listening, where not only do you listen to the other side and sort of parrot back what they're saying, reflect back to them to make sure you've got it right and to let them know they're heard, but frame back what you've heard them say in the most generous possible terms, even if you disagree with them. I find it, and I don't know what your experience has been about this, Josh, but when you're able to do that, and it seems so counterintuitive, and especially in law, the other side, it sort of takes them aback, and more often than not, they will actually then switch as well and start being more cooperative and collaborative and listening as well, taking more of an interest in your position. What's been your experience about that?
I would definitely agree. When I can position my response in a way that not only shows an understanding of what you're trying to convey, what you're trying to receive, whatever the case may be. If I can relay my message in a way that goes beyond what you've told me, more in your favor, just so I can make sure that I'm hitting your bases, make sure that I'm fully, casting a wide net and understanding the big picture of what you need, because so often negotiations involve more than, say, the dollars and cents of the deal.
Yeah.
It might involve the timeliness. It might involve the pride factor. It might involve, who knows? It can involve any number of things.
Yeah.
So when I go a little bit further, and as you said, as you were referring to, that's when you can kind of bring those other things that could be more meaningful to the person.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's fantastic that you raised that about the money, because we so often, and in your business, especially with that sort of debt collection or debt resolution, for want of a better term, everybody assumes it's just about the money. And I often say, it's almost never just about the money, right? It's about what that money represents for people. And as you so beautifully said, it can be status, it can be symbol. I mean, it means something different to everybody, and getting to the nugget behind what's really at stake can be so important. I love that. And what's the reason that you found that most negotiations fail in your experience, Josh?
Ego.
Yes.
I think that
Yes.
that's a big part of it. I
Oh,
think that, I could go into a negotiation and know that this is my goal, this is my number, and we're just so close to it. And if I would just be a little bit more amicable rather than having this, line in the sand that nobody else knows about, but I want to be the negotiator of the
yeah.
day. If I would just bend a little bit more and get the deal done, it's going to often save so much more time, so much more energy, have a happier client. So I think that a lot of that comes down to ego, or at least it does for me and some of the folks I've worked
Yeah. Oh, I have seen more deals tank because raises its ugly head, and deals that could have been great deals for people had they been able to shelve their ego. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier as well. It's about really bringing that empathy to the table, putting yourself in the shoes of the other party, trying to understand and be able to meet their needs where you can. And every time you find ego showing up, stop, drop, and roll, right? Stop, drop,
with.
and put that ego on the back seat, especially for lawyers. Like, my gosh, I hate to say it for our listeners out there, and I've been guilty as charged as well. We do tend to bring a lot of ego to the table sometimes, our conditioning. So just a great reminder to try and avoid that where you can. And I'd love you to tell us, what role do you think preparation plays in a negotiation in your experience, Josh?
It's undeniably significant. I think I would say that a failed negotiation is one that I step into realizing I was unprepared, even more so than not getting the deal done. Even if I go in and get the deal done, but realize afterwards that I was not prepared, that I didn't, in my role and in our world, if a creditor or a collector knows more about our client than we do, that's a problem.
Yeah.
That should never happen. So preparation is definitely, and it's definitely important, and it can be recognized by the other side. You might think, I got this, I can wing it, or I don't, maybe even not wing it. You might not have that attitude, but if you think you've got, I don't know, a little bit of preparation can go a long way, even on simpler cases.
Yeah, no, oh my gosh, I so agree. I think, preparation is probably one of the single most important factors to be able to give you leverage in a negotiation. And yet we so often don't. And especially within the legal profession again, well, and beyond, I would say, I think a lot of people do assume, especially if people come in knowing what they want and consider themselves prepared, but they don't consider necessarily about what how's the other party going to show up, get all of the objective evidence and facts that you need to be able to. So I'd love if you could share with us maybe some tips in negotiating around this specific issue, right? About, debt management, if you will, about helping those debt-ridden clients, or for people who are in debt themselves. What are some tips you could give about how do you negotiate that?
Sure. So I would, first things first is understand the client's risks. If if I'm looking at helping somebody with their debt, I need to know who has the upper hand, what kind of risk do they have. So if we're in a state where the attorney explains that the client can have their wages garnished, the client can have a lien placed against their home or their bank account levied, I'm going to position or step into that differently than when the attorney explains that there are no risk of wage garnishment, the client doesn't have any assets, there's little to no risk here. So I think that is one of the biggest things to look at, is what kind of risks the client has, and then what kind of protections do they have under state or federal law.
Yeah.
Entering into the negotiations with that, being aware of those two things is going to arm you. That's that preparation. That's that preparation that you're referring to. And in addition to that is just also understanding the big picture and being able to portray it. So you might be negotiating on one account that is one of six or one of eight, and the creditor collector may or may not be aware of that. So being prepared to share that and position it in a way that is beneficial to your negotiations and just gives the other party the information they need to understand the broad situation at hand that the consumer is facing.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Thank you. And Josh, I can't believe how quick our time is going here. My goodness.
Yeah.
Can you share for us something that you know now that maybe you wish you knew when you'd first started that might have helped you?
Well, all the benefit of bringing the legal elements into the picture for helping consumers with debt is tremendous. Had I known that earlier, that would have been wonderful. However, I think that again, I see a thread through our whole conversation here, but really, I think humility is the thing that I would really, if I had been more humble earlier, I may have had a lot more success, a lot more opportunity, a lot more benefit to my clients. And because it's really about recognizing that I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
And I believe I can learn something from everyone. So taking the time to hear what people have to say rather than assume that I know, because all these little nuggets and tidbits of information that I've picked up over the years, I may have been able to pick up sooner had I had a more humble outlook.
I think that is a beautiful thread as we're sort of wrapping up here as well, and a great message for all of our listeners out there, that idea of humility, and particularly within the legal profession. I think, this podcast is all about practicing on purpose. And I think when we can show up with humility, and as you've said, that empathy and listening and being able, seeking to truly put yourself in the shoes of the other party and coming up with that appreciation for their experience again, bringing that humanity to the experience, I think that's a beautiful approach. And Josh, I always like to end by asking, not to put you on the spot, but what would you say is one of the greatest mindset shifts that you've ever had in your life? And it doesn't have to be on this issue, just anything you've had that's one of those aha kind of moments for you that shifted how you looked at the world, maybe.
Recently, and it's popped up at times in years past, but the mindset shift of just, instead of why I can't, looking at a question, looking at a problem, looking at a opportunity, and instead of saying why I can't do it, turning that around and saying, how can I? And that's really been in business, in personal life. We're grappling with these ideas of homeschooling and taking our kids on the road and traveling and road schooling. And it's, well, we can't do that because XYZ, but maybe we can. Let's look at how can we do it. That's the personal side of it, but it can apply to business in so many ways. So I think turning the why I can't into how can I.
That is a great mindset shift. And as you say, it's universal, because definitely it's fantastic here. Certainly for lawyers, you could definitely benefit from that, both in terms of how you approach the practice, how you decide to show up. There's so many things where we're tied to the way it's always been done. And maybe it is time we start questioning about, why can't I do it this other way? Why can't I show up without being tied to that docketing system, for example, or that more traditional way to practice? And absolutely in our personal lives, what a game changer every day to look at those obstacles as beautiful gifts and opportunities to be able to figure out how to get past it. So I love that. So thanks so much, Josh. This has been great. There's so much value here. Really appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
Cindy, thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah. And for our listeners out there, if you want to learn more about Josh, make sure to check him out at joshrichner.com or nationallegal.com as well. And you can check him out on LinkedIn at Josh Richner as well. And I am sure you have all got loads of value from this. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't done so already, and make sure to share it with anyone that you think could get some value from this podcast and this episode. And that is a wrap for this episode. So until next time, I invite you to go forth and find ways that you can practice on purpose. Find a better way to practice law so you can rekindle your passion and make a difference in the world, negotiating your best life on your terms. Take care.